Hello there, and welcome to a new build guide for Age of Wonders 4. This one is for the Primal Culture out of the Primal Fury DLC, and tome-wise you will also need Ways of War to get this thing going, because we want to dip as deep as we can into the blindness mechanic, and the result of that was a ranged build that still has a proper front line, uses a lot of skirmishers, and damage over time is also a big thing in this build. It is very unique. I mean, the Primal Culture is unique in itself, but this one felt very powerful right from the get-go and just became more and more powerful the longer I played it. So time to share. First up, culture and racial traits. So the primal culture we pick is the Dune Serpent aspect. These guys get extra gold for sand terrain, that's one thing, but most importantly, the primal serpent that they revere inflicts blindness. Our troops all have the ability to inflict blindness to the enemy once they have 5 stacks of Rising Fury, which they attain by just fighting. This is what we're going to utilize here in this build. I went cultural trait wise for Cult of Personality. You have to unlock that via Pantheon things. If you don't have access to it, I warmly recommend any other shadow trait that you find palatable, because the entry point to the shadow affinity very early on is priceless for this build. And the other one I went for is Fabled Hunters. Here again, I think basically any tier, any green trait could do it. I think you even could go for the blue trait that reduces the summoning costs, which would fit here pretty well too. But I love Fabled Hunters for the massive kickstart that it gives you, because you have a pretty decent early game momentum with this build. Fabled Hunters just kickstarts that into a massive boost. Either way, choose to your own liking. I focused this build around Materium and Nature, because nowadays, if you want the high tier tomes, you need to work a little bit more for that. Racial traits. I went for Sneaky. More damage on flanking attacks is just really good, because it's easy to flank for us. Quick reflexes, harder to hit by ranged attacks. Well, we're blinding the enemy. This build is virtually invulnerable against ranged attacks at some point, at least to my own experience. And cheerful, because I like the cheap access to critical hits when the combat goes longer. It's pretty nifty. So, tomes. Here we go for an early Tome of Rock. Tome of Rock offers us so many things that we want to have. First up, obsidian weapons, synergized with our entire roster, except for our supporters. But the supporters have a different job in our roster. The +1 physical damage and the bleeding, man, this applies to a lot of damage over time, over longer combats. I've really enjoyed this a lot. It's way stronger than it looks on the first glance. It's best used on cultures that dwell on longer conflicts, but that's basically the keystone identity of the primal culture. They want combats that have a few turns going. It's just the thing for their stacking mechanic. Earthkin gives us more defense, which is just amazing. More mobility in the mountains is also not bad. Lesser stone spirits, I liked them because I personally found them more powerful than my basic tier 1 racial shield units, because they eventually evolve into big stone spirits. It's my personal takeaway. You could skip them altogether or use them as I did. It's your own choice. I can't really decide what's the better choice here. Rock Blast is a wonderful nuke mechanic, cancels defense modes. Pretty good stuff. Gargoyles, yeah, they are an alternative to your Primal Chargers, but here again, these two troop types, they're not what we're after. We're also after Stone Skin, all the stuff that makes our troops shine. Central Quarry, well, it gives you more production. Enough said. The other tier 1 we pick up is Tome of Roots. This gives us another dip into more damage for our melee and or archers. Since we run later down the road a couple of skirmishers, high tier skirmishers, they double the dip into these enchantments, really high payoff. But also Vine Prison, really good stuff. The combination of poison and bleed on this build really sums up to something. And the good point is that your melees get increased damage against poisoned enemies with this one. So you start to rack up more and more damage. It's really, really good. And the Entwined Thralls, well, they are pretty nifty. I like them because when you summon them and get them through their entire evolution process, you get a tier 3 shield unit, which is better than most things that we can acquire with this build. And like I said, skirmishes are really good for this build, so the Entwined Thrall shines in this build a lot. Healy Roots, well, you can pretty much skip that spell. You have better options on your own, but if you wanted to, the 2 regeneration on that one are really a big takeaway. We gain access to the Herbalist, which is for us pretty useless. It is a conduit province. This is what the biggest takeaway, but this build doesn't really utilize it because neither forests or swamps are on our turf. The rest of the synergy here is big though. Tier 2 comes, and you can now decide whether you want to go Winds or Shades first. It really doesn't matter. It's whether you want to dip into melee more or ranged more first. It really depends on your situation. I'll cover Shades first. Shades brings Shadow Blades, which is amazing, because you get to ignore 50% of the enemy's resistances if they are blind. Our build has so many options to blind enemies that you can use this to soften up big enemies a lot. I mean, this is a clean cut of 50% of any stacking resistance mechanic, which means your troops will always hurt with this build. I love this. This is a big one. Also, we gain Living Shadows, which is another amazing trait. Remember when I said virtually invulnerable against ranged attacks? Yeah, things get even worse when you have plus 10% evasion on top of all the shenanigans that you already have. Also, the enemy has a chance to get blinded when they start attacking you, which works heavily in our favor. Mind you, that blindness cuts off retaliation attacks and cuts off accuracy on the enemy's range attacks, but also the retaliation counter is massive. We gain Shade Networks, which are a big boon in knowledge income, and maybe a big sales point on taking the Shades Tome as the first one, because the earlier you can build these, the faster you can get the payoff. It's massive building. Shades, tier 3 skirmishes with a lot of goodness. They hit harder the lower the enemy gets, which is really, really cool. They have only a single strike attack, so you don't need to worry about repeating attacks on these, and they get to throw a dagger each turn, which can blind. The dagger itself also hits quite hard, and these guys are so nice. Seriously, they synergize massively into everything we did so far for the build, and they only get better the longer this goes. Rending Shadows is a nice little mini nuke that sunders defenses and blinds and deals a little bit of a damage. The blindness application is the main takeaway here. This whole book is a massive love letter towards the Primal Dune Serpent culture, in my opinion, and that's why I went for this build in the first place. Was my first inspiration. Tome of Winds now catapults us into another category of goodness. First up, Dust Storm, a 2 hex radius blindness spell, which is also freaking dirt cheap. I mean, we have a lot of mana hungry things in this build, and 2 hex radius for 15 mana. So good. It cuts the enemy's defenses into half for our melees, mind you that. Also, Seeker Arrows upgrade your tier 1 cultural ranged units a lot because their main downside is their low range. Not anymore. Also, we gain Zephyr Archers, which are then real archers if we want to get rid of the tier 1s, which also have a nice AoE ability, and they synergize with everything we enchant them on, so massive payoff on these. Wind Ragers are also really good units. They can clear the backline, they frenzy themselves and hit like a truck, and if you have the mana to pull them off, it's pretty cool. So, Abducting Cyclone for some utility, favorable winds for some dominance on the seas. This is a really, really strong utilization of this tome on this build. When we hit tier 3, things get really, really exciting. So the first thing that I went for is the Tome of Cycles. Projectiles of Decay is a massive boost for our entire roster. This is the main thing that we want first. First up, we inflict Decaying. Cuts the enemy off of healing, which is really, really brutal. Also, more blight damage for pretty much everybody on the backline and the skirmishes again. So your shades start being really, really powerful from that point on. We also gained the Druid of the Cycle, which is finally a tier 4 supporter, which, well, they have a interesting mechanic on themselves because they can revive troops, which is, if you play it right, a big, massive power card. They are very, very costly though. And, well, I personally think that parting gifts and diffuse health are, for this build, more beneficial because the flat out healing that comes out of these is really, really good. Cycle of Seasons, well, I don't know, I find this spell way too gimmicky in my opinion. It's nice, but you also research it a lot of time. I'm not agreeing with that one. The other tier 3 that I'm picking up here is either To Your Own Liking, Transmutation, or Terramancy. I have a hard time deciding. Transmutation brings us a replicated magic material to our own liking, a battle mage which can AoE stun, but we have almost no synergy with battle mages, so it's a bit of a flippy thing. They're stupidly costly and, well, they AoE stun though. It's massive. The big thing about the transmutation thing here is though, we get massive boosts for defenses via steel skin, adaptive armor, and we also get to melt enemies' armors with the melt armor spell. I personally vouch more for the Tome of Terramancy with this build, as Summon Stone Spirit comes in super handy, and the other spells here, Seismic Shock, Crushing Earth, and they give you another layer of options to do on the battlefield. Earth Shatter is really annoying to attack the enemy with, and the Tremor Ritual, well, the thing about the Tremor Ritual is not only does it deal a ton of fortification damage, it hinders the enemy to use, in their highly developed cities, to use all their buildings to their full extent. And this is a big thing. It is not always something that you would want to have, but the Stone Spirit, the Seismic Shock, and the Crushing Earth are options that I prefer over the Transmutation ones. Choose to your own liking. Both options aren't bad at all. Tier 4, well, Crucible, enough said. Meteor Arrows gets your archers to another level. Your Shades also will have splash AoE attacks. And all the other options that you get there give you a lot of battlefield magic options, which I personally really, really find extremely cool. The Magma Spirits are here, not much to write home about because we're not utilizing battle mages too much, so don't take too much out of the Great Foundry. We also are allowed to pick up another tier 4 tome in the Nature sector, and here you get to choose between Nature's Wrath and Tome of Paradise. Both very viable options depending if you want to go for tankiness, city development, or army development and getting a nice tier 5 mythical unit. It's up to you. Now, I want to stress out here before I go straight into the strategy part that Fabled Hunters might be a nice early game steroid, but the trait which enables you to summon cheaper would cut you off of the tier 4 nature tomes, but would give you also a stupid steroid towards summoning, because you might have noticed how much summoning options we have. I need to mention this because this is a legit variant that you can't play, but I personally wanted to stick to these affinities here and didn't want to take the dip into the astral affinity, just as a side note. Now, when we go into our roster, the Protectors and the Primal Daughters are what we're starting with. The Protectors are able to heal themselves if they have their Fury of the Dune Serpent stacks up, and, well, play them as long as you need to, but they're really nothing that you want to keep. The Primal Daughters are, as a matter of fact, way more interesting to keep later than the other dudes. This is because they might have a low range on the shoot blowgun skill. Here you see it already increased due to Seeker arrows, but the disengaging shot is where the money's at. You get to burst and jump back 3 hexes. This is a pretty stupid spell which allows you to basically run into the face of the enemy and spit a heavy-hitting arrow into their face and cover it up with frontline afterwards. That's one tactic, but you also can use it to actually what it's meant for as disengaging tactic when somebody's in your face. They might die fast, but they have a high damage potential, and they make up for their low range in many, many aspects. And until you have these Zephyr Archers unlocked, they do play a pretty good role. And the big thing, what I really love about them, they are very, very cheap and do a lot of damage at the same time. It's pretty cool. Now, Tier 2, you want to head towards to as quick as possible because that's where you start getting more interesting units. The Animists are your healers, and also they are summoners. They can summon a Primal Serpent, and the fun part about these is their healing is mediocre but enough for this build, and you can also use their healing if you don't need it because you have a fully healthy army. Animists can pretty much kickstart their summoning by putting their spiritual healing in the very first turn on themselves, granting them 3 stacks for themselves because you can put that on a full HP unit, no problem, and then you just let the enemy come. During that time, the cooldown will go away again, and they just need to shoot 1 time, and then they can summon the Primal Serpent afterwards. Do that, and you will notice how useful Animists can be. Don't do that, and you will wonder how that summoned Primal Serpent thing is supposed to work. The downside is, if your army is already very banged up at the beginning of the battle, and you need these to get in shape to hold the line, then you can't use this strategy. So this is why the Animists aren't overpowered at all, but you can get a lot of payoff out of that. If you have 4 or 5 of these dudes on your army and you pull that off in a orderly manner, you can have a lot of summoned trash on the battlefield. Nobody else can match that, in my opinion. Animists are cool. The Primal Chargers, though, are as well. They die too fast. That's the big downside about these. But with all the enchantments that we have running for fighters, they can deal a lot of heavy damage because we are properly enchanted. The cleaving charge is benefiting from momentum, so the damage here might look low, but if they travel 3 hexes, you get a 60% increase on that. So these guys, well, they're practically living hand grenades, and that's what they do well. But if you happen to make them survive even, they get a lot of, you can get a lot of goodness out of that. Don't rely too much on them. I personally didn't find them the most best fit for this build, but their burst damage can be really, really invaluable at times. With Tier 3, we gain access to the Ancestral Wardens, and I see these as pretty much a bread and butter unit of this build. They deal tremendous amounts of damage. Don't let yourself get fooled by the seemingly lowish numbers compared to other Tier 3 units. The thing is, they rack up statuses, they have a pole arm so they gain bonuses, and once the Dune Serpent's boon is rocking, they gain a +4 on their damage for 5 attacks. Also, they will ignore 50% of the enemy's defenses due to the enchantments that we rock, so it's pretty strong. They also get to jump wherever needed. This means they are a very mobile melee unit, and they're pretty much the best that you can get out of your native roster in terms of frontline. So spam these. Personally found neither the Primal Charger nor the Protector better than these guys, so if you can't pay them, go for them. There's just so much goodness about them. But there's also the Shades. They pretty much are the main reason why we don't need the Chargers at all, because they have a really strong hitting main attack. Again, like they work pretty similar like a shock unit, except for they don't cut the enemy's defensive stances, but we already do that with blindness. And they get to throw that dagger. I already mentioned that this blindness. What I didn't mention before is that they also have Shadowed Escape. So if they are about to die, they get teleported away, which is, with a 5 hex random direction, more often than not, really enough to escape unscathed. These guys are really cool and combo up super well. So Shades, Wardens, Animists, they make up an insanely strong synergy. I don't know, this is the when I was playing that, the thing is they are really hard to kill due to the fact that you have a lot of healing, the high tier of these troops, and you dish out a lot of damage. Also, you have really good access to healing things. Ancestral Harmony is really powerful when the Fury is on, but it's also very powerful at all times and also comes dirt cheap. Rock Blast is a nice thing, like I said. Before you have all that blindness available, this is golden. Later down the road, you will need it, not that more though. We also have Vine Prison, which is another super massive disruption spell, which allows you to just cut off parts of the enemy army and make the and then slice off the enemy into reasonable bites. And the Conjure Primal Serpent. This is just such a stupidly powerful spell. You can do that just over the entire battlefield. So, yeah, its main downside is the high mana cost. Enchantments, you also see we rock a lot of these, and this brings me directly to the downside of this build. You are eating mana like a madman, but your empire is only cranking out gold. This is really something that I felt like a big issue about that. You're really good at earning gold with this culture. Your baseline identity gives you more gold for sandy territory. And yeah, while having that strong economy, well, I really felt like I was churning through my mana like no other culture that I played since a while. So this is something that you really need to keep a keen eye out on. Apart from that, well, I really can't stress out how important it is to settle down early on to a second city and get your third city down as well as quick as possible and get that research going. You want to be as quick as possible at the Tome of Shades because the Tome of Shades just will catapult your empire forward due to the massive knowledge bonuses. Once the borders are close between your cities, the science bonus will grow even bigger, and that's the thing that you want to work yourself towards to. Hero-wise, I went this time for a Wizard King, and I totally recommend sticking to a Wizard King for this, because you just have so much battlefield magic going on that it would be just a waste to not go for it. Channeling Ritual gives you another opportunity to cast spells, and I went for the Ritualist class because it's such a big fit for the entire identity of this build. Yeah, I think Ritualists will get some serious nerfs along the way because currently every one of these paths is stupidly strong. Going Restoration, Wild Growth, Astral Ward, or Undead, all of them are amazing and offer game-changing abilities. So racking up Ritualists and some Archers was really way to go for me. I didn't need any extra frontline support, just need to add healing, and the rest was very easy. What I also noticed to be really useful is the Rite of the Guardian Spirit, which gives you access to a throwaway unit that you can utilize every single fight, which is a tier 3 unit, so it will always have some impact. This is really big. Also, utilize All Seeing as soon as you have your hands on it by adding yourself some extra Whispering Stone and crank out even more research at that point. Your research game starts a little bit slow, but eventually it kicks off into a really big explosion that is not enough to get you into a stupidly high income into the mid and late game. Those tomes are not fit for that. You need wonders and more cities for that. But it gives you just that momentum to slide real quick into the tier 3, which I really enjoyed a lot about this build. When you set up your rosters, I would really recommend to go roughly for a third of supporters, and then you mix up that with whatever feels good, like a third of melee, a third of ranged. Since you have so much synergistic units, like the Shade lives between the ranged and the melee line, I have a hard time putting it down to say what's best to go for. What I do know, though, is try to replace the Primal Chargers and the tier 1 shields eventually, because, like I said, they just don't have no long-term future in your build. Primal Renewal is nice and all, but I didn't find it to be too synergistic in this build. Alright, that's that. I don't have more to say. Thanks for watching, you guys. And leave me your comments down below. I hope you enjoyed that. I heard you guys asking for more thematically builds, and I feel like this went down into a direction like that. The utilization of the blindness theme is amazing, and I'd be really down to hear what you guys think. Working on other builds as per usual, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, and a thumbs up would be appreciated. Subscribe if you'd like. There's also a description box thingy down there leading to a playlist of mine, and of course, I want to say thanks to all of you who support Icon Gaming, and many thanks to you for watching this video up until the very end. See you soon, have a good day.